training in the Dharma.
Great, thank you, Vajrashura. And just a big welcome to everyone, wherever you are in the world. It's really lovely to have so many people here. So yeah, welcome. So yeah, I work for Future Dharma, and I started working for Future Dharma a few months ago. I was asked to start working with Future Dharma when the lockdown began, actually. And it was realised, it's quite quickly realised that we weren't getting any money in our Dharma balls anymore as usual. Classes, courses, retreats couldn't run, and people were going to have to fundraise online. So Future Dharma asked if I would work with them at that point. So I have a background in fundraising with the Karuna Trust. So I've had very good training from the Karuna Trust over the years. And Amala Vajra then asked if I'd work with Future Dharma to support Triratna situations to fundraise at this time. So I think, as Vajrashura said, there's a number of resources that I'm going to talk about today, and also some of them have been referenced beforehand in the email that has been sent out. But just to quickly touch on some of those again. So there's a Triratna Fundraising Toolkit on the Sikkha site, and that sort of covers some of the main elements of what we're going to be talking about today. It's also just been translated into Spanish, which is great. So big thanks to the translation board who did that for us. And yeah, that Spanish version will be out soon. That's not out yet, but it will be out soon. And yesterday, I put a new video actually on the Sikkha site, and another one will be appearing today. So there's two new videos. One of those is how to make an online Dharma appeal. And one of them is actually an example Dharma appeal itself. So throughout the session today, Sangamani and I will be talking about what things to include, what sort of elements and principles to include in that. But yeah, after this, you could perhaps go and have a look on that site. The second video will appear sometime later today, hopefully. And also do join the Centre Fundraising Forum, which is on the Buddhist Centre online. That's a place where we can share inspiration, ideas, questions, resources with each other. Yeah. And if anyone does want to follow up with me, if any situations do want to follow up and ask for my advice or support in the future, then please do get in touch with me. So my email address is kusaladevi@futuredharma.org. So I'm really willing, open and here to support you with your fundraising. So please do get in touch. Okay, so what we're going to cover today in the seminar is Sangamani and I are going to have different conversations about three different ways of fundraising, particularly while we have to do that remotely and not through our centres. So we're going to cover a phone campaign, an email campaign, and then live Dharma appeals on Zoom and YouTube. So I think even if you don't plan to do a phone campaign or an email campaign, what we're going to talk about in those sections is just sort of covering the main principles of fundraising. So in a way, don't assume that they're not relevant. Do have a listen, because there will be a lot of really good principles that we'll draw out through those sections. So yeah, as we know, there's lots of really good causes globally running fundraising campaigns at this time, not just within Triratna, but beyond. Obviously, a lot of people still need to fundraise. And I just wanted to mention that really. I think it's important that we don't think about that these are competing needs or taking away from our cause, but actually people will make their own choices about where they want to give. And what we can do is just be really, really clear about what it is that we specifically have to offer in Buddhist centres. So we have a vision of transformation and a path of growth and transformation and Buddhist practice. The Dharma is just really precious. So if in a way, how can we connect with that, and how can we communicate that in an inspiring and truthful way? And I also think we can invite people to be part of a culture of generosity, which is quite different from the exchange culture that we're used to out in the world. So just finally, before I move on to introducing Sangamani, I'm just going to say what this webinar is not. So we're not going to look at individual fundraising appeals or talking about different funding channels. What it's about is the principles and the practices of fundraising and how each of us can fundraise in our prospective Sangha situations. That's what we're going to be covering today. So unfortunately, we can't also cover talking about grants or trust fundraising. Firstly, that's not my specialism, that area, but also we don't want to get into those specifics. We'd rather talk about like how we personally ask people in the Sangha to contribute. So I'm very glad to introduce Sangamani here. So Sangamani and I are very good friends, and we've worked together at Karuna for a number of years, very closely, doing fundraising together and training others to fundraise. So it's a real privilege to have Sangamani here. And Sangamani is going to talk to us about fundraising at Karuna at this time. In a way, she's going to share some of this excellent training that both of us have benefited from Karuna. So in a way, although Sangamani is talking about Karuna, we'll have to sort of translate that into our own situations. So it is a different cause that we're fundraising for, but there's really a lot of very good principles and excellent good practice that Sangamani will talk about that we can learn from. And just to say, in terms of the Karuna Trust, Karuna appeals are the best training context in the movement for fundraising. So if you want to learn how to be a better fundraiser yourself, then do a Karuna appeal. You really can't get better fundraising training than that. And they're really good fun and just such an opportunity for fundraising as a spiritual practice. So I just really recommend them. I hope that those door-to-door appeals will be able to get back up and running at some point. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Sangamani. And Sangamani, I just would like you to tell us a bit about the phone campaign. So I know, we're friends and we've been talking about this, but I've heard that you recently ran a very, very successful phone campaign. So I just wonder, first off, if you could just maybe introduce yourself a little bit and then just tell us why was it that you decided to run a phone campaign at Karuna?
So hello everyone, and thanks Kusla Devi for asking me to join you today. So I've been with Karuna I've been working for Karuna for 6 years and did my first door-to-door fundraising appeal, actually with Danta Chitta, who's here, and it was quite life-changing. So as Kusla Devi said, I think not only do you learn how to fundraise, but I think it really takes your Dharma practice deeper doing this work. Yeah, so as you probably know, we raise, I think about 80% of our income through door-to-door appeals. We do about 6 a year, and volunteers from the Sangha participate in these to deepen their practice and to benefit people in India and Nepal. And our vision for Karuna is to end caste discrimination, inequality and poverty. And we do that by funding grassroots projects, focusing on education, dignified livelihoods and gender equality. So of course the lockdown happened, and that meant that we had to pull all our fundraisers. We have some regional fundraisers, we had to pull them off the streets. We had to cancel all of our appeals, and of course suddenly we need to fundraise. So we decided to do a telephone campaign. We were mixed about whether or not to do it because, well, lots of things, the virus, keeping people safe, how we're all going to be in lockdown, and whether or not it's the right time to be calling people and asking for money during a time of crisis and uncertainty. Yeah. But Karuna's, Karuna fundraising is about meeting what is ever here. So what we're trying to do is have a conversation with the conditions that we have in this moment. I mean, it's the Dharma, isn't it? It's like, that's what we're doing. And so we decided to do a telephone campaign and just connect with people. And of course, we had to find out how they were, what their situation was before we started asking for money. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sangamani. So you mentioned there that there were some doubts and a bit of uncertainty or concerns about calling supporters in a time of crisis.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about that? So what those doubts were and how that actually played out?
Yeah. Well, I personally had my own doubts. I thought, you know, maybe we shouldn't be asking people for anything, you know, during this time. And then, especially with people being furloughed, people losing their jobs, you know, there was a kind of story coming in, creating a particular reality of what I thought it was going to be. And then there was a big meeting and we talked about this, and Samaya Shri, who's one of our trustees, really helped encourage us to act. She kind of said people will expect you to do something, and the situation in India was unfolding, and there was a real sense of urgency. So we didn't know what we were going to be fundraising for. We had to sort of put a hold on a lot of our projects. A lot of the hostels had to close down. And yeah, so we didn't really have a clear vision. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we did know that we were going to need money to do something with. Yeah, so I think two of the things that we realised out of that meeting was that it doesn't have to be all neat and tidy and perfect. We don't have to have a real clear understanding, but we did need to do something. And of course, fundraising and the practice of giving is about inviting people to be part of something. And already our Karuna supporters, they want to be part of this. They value what we do. So we were just inviting them to do that. Yeah. And I guess it's like that with the Sangha, isn't it? You've got this shared vision. You want to create Sangha and spread the Dharma, and with fundraising you're inviting them to be part of do that. It's a collective effort, and I think that's really important that that's communicated. Yeah. And I think the other thing about fundraising during this time is that what we learned is that we could really tune into a collective empathy. I think suddenly everybody's lives are affected, definitely not equally, but I think there was a sort of sense of openness from people. And I think that's why it was so successful. So I think everybody's lives had been affected, and they could then imagine what it might be like in India and Nepal if you're, for example, a migrant worker or a daily wage labourer, and suddenly you've got no food. So that, yeah, it was very good, very good. People were kind of really alive to what was here.
Great. So it's good to hear that although you had those doubts and concerns, actually the reality was quite different once you got in contact with people.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, so perhaps you could just go on to tell us a bit about how you actually structured the phone campaign. How did that work?
Yeah, so our appeals are usually 6 weeks. We didn't know whether that could actually be like that, but we planned 6 weeks because we didn't know if people would be answering what the situation was, but we were willing to enter into that sort of vulnerability of not knowing how things were going to be. We used our appeal team and our regional fundraisers and some of our volunteers that were very experienced and had successful telephone appeals in the past. And we all did that from our own homes. So that was definitely a new thing. Normally, Karuna appeals are very much about teams living together. That's part of the conditions. So we created a team together online and met every afternoon in an online meeting. And we did that for 6 weeks. And we chose to call in the afternoons. We kind of thought that would be the best time to catch people. Yeah. Yeah. So I think also, you know, had to be very aware of the fundraisers. They were going to be, they're going through their own lockdown experience. We've all sort of had our own experiences and what it's like to be in lockdown. So that was part of the conversation in the sessions that we were doing, really trying to bring that to the calls so people were aware of what was going on for them. I mean, one of our fundraisers, he was very in contact with coronavirus. He had family in America and he lost 2 people very close to him. And it was really interesting. You know, what can happen, of course, is that such a loss you can withdraw and go into yourself, and he didn't. He kind of, it felt like he let that open him. He stayed open, and he met people from that place in a very sensitive way. And actually it turned out that he raised the most money that any Karuna fundraiser has ever raised in 40 years of fundraising. And it was really beautiful. It was like his heart was fully there, fully open, but his motivation was just full of fire and passion. And people got that, and people just gave to him, and it was really beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen the interview that you did with that fundraiser, and it was just so moving to see how he stayed with his own experience with tenderness, and then was still able to sort of meet people. I mean, it's quite a skill actually to do that, as we know. Takes quite a lot to learn how to do that. Yeah. So yeah, tell us how the appeal went. What were the successes? What were any learnings? How did it go?
Well, incredibly well. We actually met our target in 13 days of calling. We were only calling for 2 hours each weekday. We've never had an appeal like this. We doubled our target in the end. I've never known anything like it, so it went incredibly well. It was very, very moving to be part of it, actually, and I think we just sort of tapped into this global generosity and care for each other, which was very beautiful to be part of. Yeah, so it went very well. I guess I think the lesson is don't let those assumptions and views and fears and stories of how you think it's going to go get in the way. Because had we listened to that, we would never have had that appeal. And I'm so glad that we went ahead, even though there were so many unknowns.
Yeah, great. It's great to hear what a success it was. And what sort of responses were you getting on the phones from supporters, from householders who you were calling?
Yeah, well, it was mixed. And I guess that, well, as you know, the fundraising that we do, we're not trying to just like gate crash somebody's life. We don't just knock on a door and throw a load of information at them. We're trying to, it's fundraising as a spiritual practice. So, you know, we're trying to meet, as I said earlier, the conditions that are there, and we have a conversation with what's there. So the first point of contact is to find out how they are, what's going on, how's it affecting your situation, and that builds connection. So then you're kind of carefully sort of speaking to that place in them, and then you invite them to be part of it. You know that they're already engaged with what we're doing, and so you want to kind of tell them what else we're doing, and then invite them to be part of that. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So as a fundraiser, I'm just thinking about like what that's like from my own experience to be a fundraiser in that situation, and why that is such a strong sort of Dharma practice actually. So could you say a bit more about that, about why you think fundraising is a Dharma practice, spiritual practice?
Yeah. So I guess, it's kind of the ultimate sort of feedback practice. You're separating yourself instantly when you're calling or you're knocking on a door. You've put yourself in a position of opposition immediately. And what that can feel like is, then you're also opening yourself to rejection. And what we do as a practice, we try and come into relationship with everything that's going on for you, with self-awareness, know what's happening, and try and come out of that place and be aware of what's going on for someone else, so that there's this connection, there's a kind of bridge that closes that gap between self and other. And especially what wants to get into that gap are all the kind of views about, like, the person believes this, or the person doesn't like me, or they've got no money, or I shouldn't be here, I shouldn't be asking. And you sort of see all of that and you make it all very conscious. And actually, in a way, you could say they're the obstacles that get in the way of connection or relationship. And so what we're trying to do is bring all that stuff into the conversation and still stay in connection with the person and yourself and ask from that place. And at the same time, being very aware of why you're asking. So I think it's an excellent practice. You really get to see yourself, your habitual conditioning and your views and everything that you kind of believe, and you're able to kind of work through those views through the weeks of practicing fundraising.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I guess it's a kind of practice in authenticity as well, isn't it? And just being really embodied and authentic from where you're coming from, and what you're trying to say.
Yeah, great. And you mentioned that thing about remembering sort of why you're doing it, what you're doing it for. You'll remember this, but when I was doing one of my appeals, I went to visit Bhante Sanghas, so the appeal was in Birmingham when he was still living there. And I asked why he thought fundraising was such a transformative practice. And he very simply said, because you're doing it for others. And I think there's something about, like you said, all that challenge, the difficulty of sort of working with whatever's going on, being authentic, trying to meet the other person. But there's also underlying that is knowing that we're not doing that for ourselves to try and get money for ourselves. We're doing it for the benefit of others. And Bhante believes that's what makes the practice of fundraising transformative, so transformative. Yeah,
and actually it's so easy to get caught up in yourself, but if you're doing it for others, it sort of opens that, doesn't it?
Yeah. So could you just mention a bit to us about how you actually communicated about the cause, in that way? How did you communicate about how you're helping others on the phones?
Yeah. I think I'll just be brief here. I'm just aware of the time, but I think what's important is that you're communicating a story. Normally it would be about a particular individual, but because it was such a large scale problem, we had to sort of make that story bigger. And it's really important that there's you're really kind of communicating that in a really imaginative, compelling way that isn't guilt tripping. You really want to sort of inspire people and sort of engage people from what you're saying. And it has to be about, you're communicating a vision. I think what's really important, it's not about, you don't emphasize too much the problem. So of course Karuna were worried, how are we going to pay our bills? We were going to potentially lose a lot of money, but that definitely wasn't what we were going to be communicating. It was very much about the real lives that are being affected by the situation and how people can help change that.
Yeah, great. So focusing on the story and the vision, the actual transformation and the benefit of that the money will receive, rather than the problem of not having as much money. Yeah, great. Okay, so perhaps finally in this section, if you could just briefly cover, how did you actually ask for money?
So of course, firstly, it always starts with connection, and then we're communicating the story. And we have to give them a really clear reason to give. You're not just like offloading information. It's like you have to give them a really compelling reason for giving, and then inviting them, as I just said, to be part of that. And you need to do that in a really kind of courageous way. And of course, it's also about, it needs to be about money. We're not just updating people, unless of course they haven't got any money and they've been furloughed, and of course that would have already been the conversation. But you have to ask for money, and don't be afraid of asking for an amount. So we were calling regular supporters who were given a certain amount each month. Our starting point was to ask them to double what they were giving, and a lot of people would. And it would be so easy to think that we shouldn't be asking them at this time. And a lot of people were willing to do that. And of course, that brings up a lot of discomfort. I know that there's a vulnerability there in asking for something, for asking for help. And rejection can come in. But I think, a big practice, as you know, Kusla Devi, what we teach on appeals is to stay with that discomfort. We call it staying with the squirming. And, if you can be aware of it and breathe into it and give it space and not let it be another kind of reason to sort of not ask or to stop the conversation, it just changes, and you can just bear that, and people give. And of course, what's really important is don't be apologetic. There's nothing wrong in asking. There's nothing wrong in asking people to help each other. Yeah, so that's a very sort of important thing to remember. Don't apologise for asking.
Great. Great, thanks Sangamani. Yeah, really, really good to hear about that. Yeah, really glad that the appeal was successful for you, but it's just great to hear how you sort of evoke that appeal and the different sort of principles that were important throughout that. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to go on and I'm going to talk a little bit about email campaigns now.
Yeah, so you're going to talk about the value of them.
Yeah, so I think the value in having an email campaign is that you can reach a lot of people. So as we all know, like in our Buddhist centres, we'll have probably mailing lists already. So we have contacts for a number of different people. And the benefit of an email campaign is that through that you can reach many people. And also another benefit of using email fundraising at this time is that what you can do is you can include the links which directly go to your giving pages. So practically you're making it quite easy to give. I like to think, actually this came up when you and I were talking, Sangamani, the other day and sort of preparing for this seminar, just thinking about the link as the Dana bowl.
Yeah.
You know, we haven't got that physical Dana bowl in the centre at the moment, but actually the link to your giving page is like the Dana bowl. So you're sort of, you're showing people the Dana bowl and inviting them to give to that. So I think in an email campaign, you can do that. You can include the link in a number of ways and sort of say, look, here you go. If you click on this link, you can give. Yeah. So yeah, I think the value is it reaches many people and practically it just makes it quite easy for people to give. Yeah.
And what should be included in that email? What sort of things?
Yeah, so with all fundraising appeals, and I mentioned this in the fundraising toolkit, it's really important that the format that you use for fundraising is a case for support format. So I'll just briefly outline what that is. So you start with the vision. You've mentioned this, Sangamani. It's really important to start with the vision. You move on to talk about the problem. So the problem often is that we're not getting the money, or there's not. It's good to be specific actually with the figures there. Actually, I'm going to say a bit more about the vision. I'll unpack these more, and if you want to have a look in the toolkit, that's where it just kind of lays it out quite clearly. So with the vision, what you might want to do is have an appeal name and an image to go alongside that vision. So in an email, you're wanting to communicate what that vision is, the story, the impact that people's money can have. And what might be nice to do that is just to have, I know that in Dante Chitta did this with your appeal in Melbourne, you had the 3 jewels appeal. And on your website, you had this lovely image of the 3 jewels. And as people gave, you coloured in one of those jewels and then you sort of moved on. So by the end of that campaign, people could see very visually that their money was going towards sort of sharing the 3 jewels. And I thought that was just a very simple but very beautiful way of communicating that vision. So having an appeal name and an image can help with the vision. And then you'd move on to the problem. So I think as you were saying, Sangamani, like we don't want to spend too long on the problem, but it is very good to be clear about figures. So it might be that at this time you're being clear about what the shortfall is. So the money that you're not making as a result of the Buddhist centre doors having closed. And really in this problem section, I think what the opportunity is to invite people to take shared responsibility for that problem. So we're sort of inviting people in the Sangha and saying, look, will you share this problem with us? We've got this shortfall each month. And what we really ask is that together we can sort of do something about that. So that takes us on to the solution. So the solution might be just outlining the target, exactly how much you need, and really clearly saying how people can help. So having a lot of clarity around the ask. Do you want people to give regularly? Would you rather that they give a one-off donation? So generally, regular donations for Buddhist centres are really helpful. It means that well, often in the Buddhist centres, we're supporting people, aren't we? You know, we've got order members who are supported. So that's something that needs to happen on an ongoing basis. So if we knew that we had regular individual giving coming in each month, then that could really clearly pay for that support. And also it might pay for general running costs in the Buddhist centre. And then on the whole, you'd have, rather than regular giving, you'd ask for one-off donations. Generally, if you know that you need a one-off amount for a big project, so it might be something like you need new windows, or you want to move to a new Buddhist centre, and you know you need this particular one-off amount. So generally that's when you'd ask. Or maybe if you're doing a particular event, like a retreat or something, you might have like a one-off amount then that you're trying to raise. Of course, we've seen this, like for those of you that are on at the moment from India, you know that you need money for these emergency food parcels, for hygiene kits, and you probably have a bit of a sense of a budget of like how much you need to help. So there you might be asking people for one-off gifts rather than regular gifts. The next part in the case for support is you. So that means you're making it personal. You're making your appeal personal to each individual. So you're not talking in a general or abstract way, but this is what you were saying earlier, Sangamani. Fundraising is about connection with individuals. Obviously, it's not so easy to do that in an email, because you can't quite make an email as personal as a phone call. But actually, in things like MailChimp, you can make sure that the email is addressed to the particular person's name. So rather than saying dear friends or dear all, having an email that goes out to a person's name is much more helpful. And then finally, in that case for support, you ask people to give now. So while they have that urge, and while they have that they feel they want to be generous, ask them if they can act on that immediately. I think we all know life can just get in the way. And asking people to give now can just really help. So I think the other thing to include in a video and in an email, is at this time is to include a video. There's so many emails going around, and there's a lot of text and a lot of sort of words. And I think anything that can make your email stand out a bit is really helpful. And especially if you were looking at an email and you saw a video of someone that you know who teaches at the centre, the chair of the centre, or someone who you see quite regularly, to see their face on a video would be much more attractive than to sort of read through some text. So if possible, put a short inline video in your email. I would recommend that is 5 minute maximum. Really about 3 minutes is good for one of those videos. So you want to make them short. People aren't going to watch something that's long. And again, you do a short video ask, and you tell people what your vision is, what the problem is, why you need the money. As I said earlier, it's really good to sort of have the links to your giving page scattered throughout the email. Well, I say scattered. You'd want the links in 3 or 4 different places throughout the email. And that's really, if you imagine sort of opening an email, we don't always read emails from start to finish, do we? We sort of browse through, we just have a quick scan to see what's important and what we're being asked to do. So if you can put the links in there and make them really obvious what they are, so either a button saying donate now or give, or a specific link that sort of stands out and is in bold and perhaps underlined, that makes it really easy for people to give. Yeah, also a clear target. I mentioned this before, but targets are really valuable. Sangamani, we know this story, don't we, of when like Amla Vajra always used to tell us this on appeals. There was an appeal who once hid their scoreboard. They weren't happy about sort of having a scoreboard and having a target. And, you know, I understand the reasons for that. I think they just wanted to raise as much as they could, and they didn't want the pressure of having to think about scores and competing with each other. But actually that appeal didn't do very well. It wasn't very successful. And I think that's because targets as a fundraiser really help you. They help you know what you're aiming for. But also when you're asking people to contribute towards a target, it really helps them have that sort of motivation to think, oh, I can do something quite concrete to move towards that. Yeah.
And of course, it's like a collective goal, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you know, you can sort of work together to move towards that. Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, something else that you suggested earlier, Sangamani, which is suggesting an amount. So we've got my Trinara on the call here. So I'm just going to mention a little story from Brixton. Amalavajra's mentioned this story as well, but this is about the value of asking for a particular amount. So the first Sangha night that Brixton did during the lockdown, so their first sort of online Sangha night, it was well attended. I think they had about 48 people. And they had a good Dana appeal at the end of that, which I think that was my Trinara who did that Dana appeal. But apparently only one person gave, and they gave a £5 one-off donation. So I think Amalavajra and Maitrinara and Virinaga, they were a bit sort of a bit confused by that. They weren't sure why that was. So they had a bit of a rethink about how to do these online Dana appeals. And 2 weeks later, they had another Sangha night. There were fewer people, but they got 4 monthly gifts and 3 large one-off gifts, which totaled £1,850 in the first year. So that goes to show like what a difference it made. And the difference in their ask was that they had a clear and easy system to give online. So they had links, they had a specific ask that they were asking people to do. But also they had a target, and they were asking for particular amounts. So their target was £2,000 a month. They asked 40 people to give £50 a month. And the response that they had was obviously quite different from when they didn't suggest an amount. Mm. And just finally with emails, it's really helpful to send an email to people who are already supporting to say thank you. And perhaps, as you've said, like to ask if they'll increase that amount or if they're able to give any more at this time. And then a different email, which is worded differently to people who don't already give yet. So just think about how you word those 2 emails that you're sending out.
So when would be a good time to send?
So when to actually send the email. So I'm not an expert in this area in terms of sort of marketing and what timing is good. But from my own experience, what a good time to send emails out has been mornings at the weekend. People tend to be more spacious at the weekends. If they see something in their inbox in the mornings at a weekend, there's perhaps more space than during a busy week. So I'd say, not at the beginning of the week. People are probably thinking about work or sort of getting into the week and getting focused. So I think, I don't have any more information about that, but that's what I've learnt. Yeah.
Do you want to say a few more bits about the format of the email?
I will. The length is important. Yeah. So I would say 1 side of A4 maximum for an email. You want enough content where you have impact and you're giving people the information that they need. But as I said before, it's really important not to make it too long. And if you've got this video in there as well, that's going to give quite a bit of the message. So you probably don't need too many words around that. So like maximum 1 side of A4, but actually that's still quite long. So keep it enough content and impact, but certainly not something that's too long. And in terms of the format, actually, MailChimp's very good at making emails look nice. So MailChimp is something that you might want to consider. And if you do have a sort of longer email, it's probably good to have headings for some of the sections, or certainly to make some areas bold or underlined. So again, if you're just sort of glimpsing through to see what you're being asked to do, it'll be really clear there'll be particular bits that will stand out.
You mentioned the PS the other day.
So it's really good to add a PS. So apparently data shows, so a PS is like a postscript. That's like something that you add at the bottom after the email or at the end of the email. So after you've sort of signed off, adding something after that as a postscript can be really helpful. So data shows that a lot of people follow a link in a postscript. And again, it's probably that people just scroll to the end of the email to see what they're being asked to do. So yeah, it's really important to have that link directly to your giving page or your giving platform down at the bottom of the email. Yeah.
And what about, I mean, people, I mean, I speak for myself, don't always immediately respond to emails. So how many do you think you should follow up?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yep, I'm very similar. I'll read an email, think like that's really important, and I mark it as unread and think I'll come back to it. And then like 4 weeks later or something, gosh, this is awful for anyone who sent me emails. They now know what happens.
Leave it for long enough, they don't.
Yeah. But yeah, for that reason, it's really good to prompt people. So I would say two follow-up emails after your initial email is probably good. One about a week later, and then perhaps another one another week after that. And what you can do with those emails actually is just like update people, so you can let people know how things are going, how you're moving towards your target, how things have gone so far, and how much you still need to raise. Yeah.
And what about what do you do at the end of that? What about supporter care and follow on sort of email?
Yeah. So we can't say much about supporter care. Partly, again, it's not my area of expertise, but it is just really important to say thank you to people. I'm sure we'll all know that, like, if you're thanked personally for a gift that you've given, that really makes a difference. So personal thank yous, if people have given, are really important. Yeah. Great. So that's the email section. So what we're going to go on to do now is Sangamani and I will have a chat about live streaming or Zoom Dharma appeals. So in a way, if you like, these live Dharma appeals that you might give when you're conducting classes online at the moment.
Can I just suggest, sorry, Kusala, I'm just going to cancel the spotlight and people can switch to speaker view so it flicks between you two naturally, okay? If you're on a computer.
Right.
Okay.
So I was thinking back, Sangamani, to when we were working together.
Yeah.
And this area of like live Dharma appeals is like when we were on the doors or the phones. It's like you have people directly in front of you who are there in real live time, and you're doing this sort of immediate personal ask. So yeah, I just thought we could have a conversation about what that's actually like and what's helpful. Yeah, so maybe I could ask you, like, when do you think it's a good time to do these Dharma appeals online?
Yeah. So I think it's good to do it when people are engaged, isn't it? So whenever that is, so it could be at the end of the session, or if you're doing a retreat, it could be each day, because not everyone always comes to every session, I guess. But yeah, I think what's important is doing it when people are alive with whatever it is that you've been engaging in.
Yeah, and I've noticed that with the online fundraising is people don't say if your retreats run over a week, you get a very different amount of people and audience for each session. So I think that's why it is important to ask on each session, because you do want to make sure that people hear that Dharma appeal. Yeah.
And what's important about, what are you asking for, how you're doing it?
Yeah, so I'll have to talk a bit about the practicals of how you actually do that. So as I said, there'll be 2 videos on the Sikkha site later today, and you'll be able to look back on those. They'll sort of cover these main principles. So as I said earlier, you'll use a case for support format again. So that format's important to do, but you'll need to make it much more succinct than you would do in an email. So the length of a live Dharma appeal you want really is to be between 3 and 5 minutes. Yeah. And also, Sangamani, you'll know, because I was sharing this with you the other day, I had this sort of inspiration of the 3 C's. So we know about the 3 C's that Banti's talked about, but these are a different 3 C's.
Kusala Devi's 3 C's.
Yeah. So the 3 C's that I came up with were connection, conviction, and clarity. So I'm going to ask you, because you spoke about connection earlier, so can you say a bit more and just sort of unpack in a live Dharma appeal what's important in terms of connection?
Yeah, well, when people are knocking on doors, we always encourage them to stop, and ground and be really present with what's going on. So that's the first point. You're connecting with yourself, everything that's here. just being with that, breathing with that, and especially staying with the discomfort, not letting that sort of cause a reaction in you. You also need to be in connection with the people you're talking to, with your Sangha. You know, and online especially, it's kind of, well, it's hard, isn't it? I'm struggling now. I've got my camera up there, I've got some notes here, and then I can see you in the middle. So just remembering that, you know, I'm trying to speak to all of you. So trying to remember that and be in connection with you. So eye contact's important, and speaking personally, making it about you. Yeah. And then also being in connection with the cause. That's really important, being in connection with the vision, being in connection with the story, the meaning, what we're trying to do, what's of value. Sometimes on the doors, I talk about having 3 legs. You're having 1 foot in your own experience, 1 foot here with the householder, and 1 in India. And, you know, just sort of remembering it, all of those aspects have to be there for connection to take place. Yeah, so also get away from the script. You know, you're not trying to just impute a script onto people. Really try and talk from your heart, from your experience, from what's really alive, and especially from what's alive in what's just happened in the session. If there's anything that you can draw out from what's here, that would be great to talk about that.
Yeah, I think that's, again, that's quite a skill, isn't it? So, you know, there's been a class and perhaps someone else might have led that class and done a talk or something, and you don't necessarily know what's going to come out of that. And then to do a Dharma appeal that is somehow connected with that is quite a skill. I think if there is a way that you can find something in that that's a principle that you can sort of explore and unpack in the Dharma appeal, then it's great.
I was just remembering, sometimes I go to Buddhist centres and I do appeals for volunteers, to try and invite volunteers to join appeals. And I might have had an idea about what I want to say and think that I'm going to be talking about that. But by the time the break comes and it's time to do an announcement, I'm much more inspired by something that's just been said, or something that might have happened earlier that day. And so I'll just talk about that instead. And that feels much more satisfying, actually. To be coming from that place.
Yeah, great. Good, so that's connection. So shall I go on and do the second C?
Yeah, tell us about conviction, Kusala Devi.
Okay, so conviction. So it's really normal, I think, when asking for money to feel apologetic about that. Like you and I know from doing Karuna appeals, like for ourselves probably, but also a number of fundraisers that we come into contact with will feel quite apologetic to have to ask for money. There's certain conditioning that we might have around money. You know, people don't always find it easy to ask others to give. It's really important, though, that you are non-apologetic about this, and also just sort of transparent. And what helps that, I think, is having a sense of conviction. So in a way, remembering that people want to give, that people want to be part of something. Well, at the start of the lockdown, I was listening to a podcast actually about fundraising, and it was saying why now is still a good time to ask, why now is still an important time to ask. And the reason that the leader of this podcast gave, he said, people do want to give. And he gave this beautiful story. So he spoke about these 2 young boys who were in a supermarket. They were helping their mum shopping. They went to the pasta shelf. So those of us in the UK will remember what that was like at the beginning of the lockdown. And I'm sure it's like that in other countries as well. There was a bit of sort of panic buying and people feeling like before the lockdown, they needed to just go and in a way get food from the shelves. Yeah. So that's what was happening here, was these 2 boys had gone to buy some pasta. So they'd run to the pasta shelf and they'd seen like all that was left was 2 bags of pasta. So these 2 boys grabbed a bag each and turned around to run back to their mum. And there was an elderly lady stood there about to buy some pasta. So every time it gets me. So she sort of stood in front of this empty shelf, like wanting some pasta, and the 2 boys have got these 2 bags. Anyway, apparently they just immediately gave both bags of pasta to her, and they ran off saying, "There's no pasta left, Mum." So, you know, I just think that's such a beautiful story of like, people do want to give, and especially if there's a need at this time, people like can see that and they want to do something about it. So we don't have to feel like we're sort of manipulating people or making people feel guilty or anything like that. It's like we all have like probably a natural impulse to give and to help others. And what we're trying to do as fundraisers is help people contact that. So rather than getting something from them, we're trying to help them contact that sense of wanting to give and contribute if they're able to, of course. Yeah.
Also, sometimes I think of it like being what values do I want to kind of encourage in the world, and participate in myself, and generosity is and care and giving to each other is so important, and I just remember that.
And I think what also helps give me conviction when I'm doing a Dharma appeal is being in touch with what I've gained from the Buddhist Centre. So what have I gained from coming into contact with the Sangha, with the three jewels? If I'm in touch with that in myself and the importance and the value of that, then that's really going to give me that conviction to be able to ask people in a much more straightforward way. Yeah. So Sangamani, will you move on and tell us about the third C, which is, well, yeah, you can say what it is.
That's clarity. Yeah, clarity. So we covered this earlier, so I'll just sort of briefly go over them. Tell people what you want, make it really clear what you want and what you're asking them to do, whether that's a regular or a one-off give. The target, so be clear about that, and the sense of urgency and when it needs to happen. You know, communicate that in a way that's easy to hear, and make it really easy for people to give. As Kusala Devi said earlier, links in the chat box, tell people where the website is, and suggest an amount. So all those things need to be really clear, so when people are moved and open to giving, that they can then act on that.
Yeah, brilliant. So I'll just say a little bit more, because that's, it's really helpful. And in terms of online Dharma appeals and this thing about where to put the link, I think that's really important actually. So I'm just going to draw a little bit more out about that. So if you're doing your class through YouTube or you're live streaming, then what you can do is you can put the link to your giving page or your giving platform underneath the video. So sometimes many people will be watching the live stream, but also you might have quite a lot of people like accessing that talk afterwards. So you don't know who's going to come and watch the talk. And if you've got the link there that people can give to if they feel moved after watching that video, then having the link in the description really helps. Also, if you're live streaming and you're doing a Dharma appeal, you might want to have someone who's doing the sort of tech in the background. And you might ask them to copy the link for you and put it in the chat box at the time of your live stream, so that it actually appears as you're saying, oh, please click the link now. You might sort of want to time that well so that the link pops up when you're asking people to give. And also in terms of Zoom rooms, anything that you put in the chat box, we'll probably know this, like when you close the Zoom meeting, anything that's in the chat box disappears. So there's a few things you can ask people to do about that. One of the important things actually probably is you can just ask them to save the chat. So at the end of a Zoom call, if you just sort of remind people to click on the 3 little dots in the chat box and press save chat, and that will like download all those links that they've got in there, so they've got them afterwards. It might be you don't want people to get too distracted by sort of following the link, but you might just ask them to copy that link and so that they can follow it later, just so they've not missed it completely. Or you might just tell people what your website is. So if you've got a really clear URL like nottinghambuddhistcentre.com/give, it's like that's something that people are going to be able to remember really easily. So perhaps just being really clear about how they get there. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, so I guess just one final thing to remember and emphasize is what you meet when you're asking, just a reminder of that. And I think a big thing can be views around money. On appeals, we talk about it being like the maras that get in the way of asking, or your conditioning is another way of looking at that. you know, sometimes I've seen at Buddhist centres when there's an appeal, a Dharma appeal, that it feels like there is that sort of stuff being subtly communicated. And it can sort of manifest as just sort of people saying, oh yeah, the Dharma bowl's over there, you know, please give to it. And then that's it, and we move on. So just, I think it's a real practice, and I think it's helpful to ask other people for feedback in a kind way after you've made your appeal. How did it come across? Did you pick up anything? Because often there's a lot of views around money and asking. So the main areas, of course, and I would recommend doing a Karuna appeal if you want to sort of deepen this. Rejection, you know, what's your relationship to rejection? Are you someone that's used to being quite self-sufficient and getting on with it yourself, so you don't need to open yourself to help? What's your relationship to fear? What are your sort of strategies of kind of not experiencing fear? What's your relationship to generosity? And I think especially receiving generosity. And maybe it's a bit different when you're doing it for others, you're receiving it for others, but the two are quite linked as well. And also, are you an abundant type, or you are sort of, do you limit yourself with your view around how generous other people can be? I think that's good to sort of think about. And also, is there a story that you think that you're manipulating other people by asking? So all of those things, they're like the maras that can come with fundraising and making appeals. So just, especially I think asking people for feedback at the end of your appeal would be a good thing to do. Yeah, how do you come across?
Yeah, great. Yeah, and as you say, like in a way, just us being willing to learn about ourselves and what our own tendencies are in relation to money, in relation to asking for help, in relation to generosity. You know, do we give to charities? Do we think it's a good thing to give? So just like a willingness to open ourselves up and really explore our relationship with money and be aware of that and what's going on when we're actually asking people. Yeah.
Because it will be communicated.
Yeah, it'll all come out. Yeah. Okay, great. So that's really good. So I think we're going to move on to sort of opening up to questions. So just to sort of conclude, really, there are a couple of other forums that you might want to use, and that's having a message on your website and social media. And again, perhaps that video that you have on your inline email, you might also want to include that on social media and your website, including, and having the links is really important again. So I've got a top 10 tips, but I'm not going to go over those because we're sort of running a bit short on time. So I think I'll email those out to you afterwards. So there's these top 10 tips, which are the principles that are drawn out from the conversation that Sangamani and I have had. So there's nothing new in there, but it's just sort of summarizing those. Yeah. So I'm aware that what we haven't been able to touch on is things like grants and trusts, but there's some really good webinars online. So again, I'll send some of the links out for some of those. Now, the ones that I've accessed are UK based or based in America. So I'm not sure, but I think there will be principles in those that are helpful for everyone. So have a look at some of these free online webinars, and you can watch the recordings as well. So again, I'll send the links out for those, or Vajrashura is going to send those out for us. And I'm also aware that there's might be people in the webinar today from centres who have raised enough money and they felt like they've got enough to cover what they need. And so they're giving to other centres at this time. And that's just so inspiring. I just think that's really wonderful that there's this sort of culture of like centres like just taking what they need and then giving what they don't need to help others. So yeah, I've not been able to touch on that, but I'm just really inspired by that. So yeah, I think we'll open up to some questions, Vajrashura. So I'll hand over to you.
So we have a few questions, but do send in more questions if you have them. But big thank you to Kusaladevi and Sangamani for all that really good information. We don't have loads of questions, but so again, if you have questions, do ask. So someone was asking, we always use third-party platforms like GoFundMe or Just Giving for online fundraising. Is it possible to have a Triratna platform? Big question.
Oh, that is a big question. Yeah, so just to say, you probably, I'm not sure who asked that, but they might have seen that I've done this comparison of giving platforms, which is on the Sikkha site. But again, I had to use the sort of ones that I knew from UK, so it might not be that helpful internationally. And yeah, I suppose the downside is that, like you say, it's third party, and actually they do charge. Some of them do, well, most of them charge, but there is a comparison on there. So some of those sort of charge less than others. So it's worth having a look, I think. And yeah, in terms of whether we have a Triratna platform, I think it's a great idea. I'm not sure how possible that could be, but I think it's a great idea. Yeah. Yeah.
Very, very technical as well. I think there's a lot of stuff in the background around money.
More about that than me, Vajrashuri.
Yeah, that was Sudipta's email, our question. So when you, this is the question from me actually, but when you talk about having the video in the email, I'm guessing you're talking really about a still from the video that brings you to, that's a link that brings you to the video. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, that's right. So you want, so you want an image that makes it really clear and attractive, and then yeah, like you say, having a link there that will take you perhaps to Vimeo or to YouTube, wherever the video is hosted. Yeah.
Okay, great. So Pranyanita is asking how to combine the phone and the email campaigns in terms of timing, so they don't compete against each other. Could you say a bit about that?
Great. Hi, Pranyanita. Yeah, I'll hand over to Sangamani for that. Yes, I think you have a bit of a sense of what you've done at Karuna around when you do the phone campaign in relation to the email campaign. Yeah.
Yeah. So those, I mean, all these different ways of asking, we kind of did on our phone appeals. So of course, everyone that we already were calling, they'd had a live, they'd met us live. So in your Buddhist centre, they'd already sort of met you. We then sent out to start with an email to let people know that we're about to launch a crisis appeal, which is what we needed to do at that time, and they knew that we'd be getting in touch, so we let them know that, and then we started calling them. And alongside that, actually, we had a sort of live on our website. We had a sort of live page that was people could look at, see how we're doing, and then of course we follow up with emails to say thank you, to let them know how it's gone. And actually, the good news is yesterday we met our target, our general target for that first phase of fundraising. Of course, we need to continue now, and you'll need to continue that. But yeah, we now move into the next phase. It's like keeping people with you alongside that.
Yeah, great. I'll just say a little bit as well, because at Future Dharma, and generally with appeals, what you can also do is you can contact some lead or major donors at the start of the appeal. So before you sort of launch officially and sort of get the emails and the word out there, it's really good to just contact some people who might have given bigger amounts to your situation before, and who you know are sort of really on board with you and might have the finances to do that. So you could contact just a few people and ask if they'll be your lead donors. And what that means is then when you're asking the wider pot, you've already got this sort of, you can already say, oh look, we've made 50,000 of our 20,000, 50,000 of our £200,000 target already. So that really inspires people to give towards it. So you're not sort of starting from naught and from really cold. It's like you're then inviting people into something that already exists. So that's something worth considering, is just sort of phoning and having personal contact with some of those major or lead donors before you then open out to a wider appeal. So hopefully that answers your questions.
So there is a few questions related to that, which is about setting the target. So a couple of people, how do you reach a decision regarding the target? And someone else asks, how do you go about setting the target? If it's too short, you sell it. If it's too small, you set yourself short. If it's too large, you don't meet it, and it's demoralizing.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, setting targets. Of course, it needs to be based on the need. So you want to have a look at what the need is. But also, well, it's good. It can be good to sort of stretch yourself a bit, I think, with a target. So just sort of stretching yourself slightly above what you might need, partly to ensure that you're covering what you need, and partly because that can be quite inspiring and also it can sort of help people have more of that sense of abundance if you're asking for more. I don't know what you think, Sangamani, about that.
Well, I was just thinking for this telephone campaign, normally I increased everybody's target to start with, and I've never done that before, and I'm really glad that I did. I don't even know why I did. I just had a sense that we've got to make a lot of money, so I just did it, and they all exceeded that amount anyway.
Yeah, but I think that's true. The thing of it being potentially demoralising. I think what might need to happen, if it's looking like you're not getting your target, then somehow you need to sort of reinvigorate and re-inspire people, and it might be you need to sort of re-inspire yourself. So getting together as a team, perhaps having an online meeting, just really like inspiring yourself about what your vision was and being in contact with that, so that then you can say, okay, what are our next steps? What should we do moving forward? How can we keep inviting people in different and creative ways?
And I think as long as you're covering all of these principles, you should be okay. And again, asking for feedback from your team as well will help you keep it alive and hopefully do well and be successful.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question or two. Do you suggest a Dana amount range for each session or retreat? You know, like often when people book on to our courses and retreats, there's like waged, unwaged, student or whatever. Do you do that in any way?
Of course, there's different ways of doing it. So I gave that story of what they've done in Brixton of just sort of suggesting an amount. At the moment, like, I think what you can do as well is just really make it very clear that you know that not everyone is in a financial position to give. So just sort of clearly saying that, you know, that's the case, and you're still wanting people to come along to your Sangha. Sometimes you know, when we're on the doors, often what we say is, are you able to give £25 a month? And if they say no, then you might say something like, oh, can you give as much as you feel able? You know, or can you give, what would you enjoy giving? How much would you enjoy giving? So there's ways of asking that sort of help people to connect within themselves and work out within themselves what they're able to give. So a suggested amount can be helpful, because sometimes people flounder if they don't get a suggested amount. They think, oh, I really want to give, but I've just no idea. So you do want to give some guidance. But yeah, I'm not sure who asked the question, but I think it's a good point that you might give sort of 3 suggestions potentially. But I think with an online short Dana appeal, one amount is more helpful. It's going to stay in people's minds, and it's going to be a bit more succinct. Yeah.
Right. Okay, good. And in terms of the marketing, when you got the video with the email, do you repeat the content in the email and the text, or does the text just point towards the video? What's the best you guys have found? If that question makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. So I think sometimes people might look at one or the other. So I think you want the same message in the video, but perhaps just delivered in a different way. So as we were saying, like, you just don't want it to be a script. So whoever's doing that video, you want them to be in contact with themselves and in contact with the vision, and communicate that in a way that works for them. So always when you're having an appeal, you've got this same vision, you've got this sort of story that you're telling in a way, if you like, but there's different ways that can be presented. So in your email, that's presented through the text, but in the video, that might be whoever's giving the appeal is in touch with that. I don't know what you think, Sangamani, if you have thoughts about that.
No, nothing more. Yeah.
Okay, great. So there's a couple of questions around getting the rest of your centre team on board. At our centre, there's lots of teachers, 3 of us at the seminar. How are we going to convince the rest of them, especially the reluctant ones? And then the other question is how to deal with opposition from other order members, because people do have very strong views and emotions around asking for money and money itself and things like that.
Yeah. Sangamani, go on.
I don't know if it still happens, but I remember Amala Vajra was going and doing money awakening workshops with people. And I, from what I hear, that was very good. It really sort of opened up that conversation. Again, it's like we're not trying to, if there isn't a conversation about it, then all that stuff just is a bit unconscious and then plays out, doesn't it? And creates a particular culture within a centre. I think the more you can bring that into relationship with each other and get into understanding about it, better. Because, you know, it does get in the way. It does get in the way of generosity and creating abundance and getting people to participate. So it is really worth giving some energy to.
Yeah, I think that's the first thing I would say, like within your council or your teaching team and the order members in that situation, it's just like actually a willingness to have that conversation, and even just like naming some of these difficult issues, naming like, oh, we're all going to have different conditioning around money, and we're all going to feel differently about doing this, we're all going to be confident in different ways, but can we connect around a vision? So it's again like, how can we contact a vision that's important for all of us, and like invite people to be part of that, because that's all we're doing. Like, we're not trying to manipulate or get stuff out of people. It's like we're trying to share that vision, and I invite people to be part of that. So I think if you can touch in with that as a team, then that's going to really help, hopefully.
Okay, great. Let's keep going. Is it necessary to make an appointment prior to a telephone fundraising appeal? Or do you just cold call people, so to speak?
Yeah.
So of course you've got, in this country at least, you've got GDPR guidelines, rules, and you have to make sure that you're covering that. So all of the people that we called had agreed to have telephone calls. We're very clear when we first meet new supporters on the doors is that you'll only get a couple of telephone calls a year, or points of contact with us, so we don't sort of hound people with it. But no, all of our, whether it's knocking on doors or whether it's telephone campaigns, we're just calling. And then, well, that's where the practice is. You have to then meet what you meet. And often we're calling at really not always the best time for the person that we're calling or whose house we're knocking on. It's often dinner time, or they're putting the children to bed, or they're just coming from work. But that's always part of the conversation. And we're making connection with that to begin with.
I know people, when I did my Karuna appeal, people really appreciated the fact that you could see that they were busy, and you said you'd come back some other time, you know?
Yeah,
if
exactly.
That was really what it needed to be,
Yeah, it's really about empathy and just seeing someone, not imputing this idea that we've got onto them.
So I guess in a Sangha, regular donors, you're going to probably know them anyway, so it's probably okay just to call them with the awareness of being flexible around it.
Yeah, and of course we can always then make an appointment to call back, which is what we do.
Okay, great. There's a few more questions. So Sachalina asks, here in Bristol, we focused a recent appeal on asking for regular donations and named specific amounts that we needed. We did have a small increase in regular giving, but a big fall off in one-off donations. So we're tempted to ask for one-off donations at the present time. What do you think? And also there's another question, is it better, which is related, is it better to ask for one-off donations or regular donations rather than giving both options in an appeal?
I think as long as you're clear about what you're asking for, then you can ask for both, because well, certainly if you've got regular Sangha members, you might be more likely to ask them for regular gifts. Whereas if you've got people coming to a drop-in or newcomers, you might be more likely to ask them for a one-off. So it depends what medium you're using for your ask. But if it's a live donor appeal, then you might be sort of saying you could give regularly or you could give one-off. Just thinking about your question, Sachalina. Yeah. So I know that we'll have more of a chat about this together at some point, but I think well, it's hard, isn't it? I know for myself, like, even though I give regularly to the Buddhist Centre in Nottingham, I still also put money in the Dana bowl, or I still give one-offs on top of that as well. So I don't think of it as an either or, but I'm aware that some people do. So some people, when they're giving regularly, they think, oh, I'm giving what I can here. But I wonder if, like, we can just invite people to sort of give as and when they're inspired to do that. So seeing that as a real practice, like, oh, you know, it's acknowledging that people are giving regularly and thanking them for that, and just sort of really being grateful for what they're being given, but then saying, oh, if you're able to give more at any time, then please do. In terms of your appeals, actually, like, it's hard, isn't it? Like when you've already done an appeal to ask for something and then you're thinking about asking for something else. And sometimes there does need to be a bit of space between that. People can get like fatigue from being asked for lots of things. So yeah, perhaps it just needs a bit of thinking about when and how you ask for that. Do you have any thoughts about that, Sangamani, about like if you've just asked for regular and then the one-off gifts have dropped?
No, I guess the only thing I'm thinking is whenever you're asking, you're open to a no as much as you are a yes. So holding both equally is what's important, you know. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a few more. We're not going to get through all the questions, I'm afraid, but is there any support to help centres create their fundraising page online?
Yeah, well, actually, I could do that. That's sort of my role, what I'm doing at the moment. So just getting in touch with me personally. And similarly, there was a question earlier about this something around how you get others on your team to ask for money if they're a bit reluctant to do that. Again, like, do get in touch with me, because we could have a chat about that, and it's something that I might be able to arrange with your sort of local situation. It's possible that I might be able to meet and give you some training around that as a sort of team. But yes, the person that asked about online fundraising page, yeah, I'd be happy to help. So please do get in touch.
Okay, great. And also someone else is asking, would it be possible to have online money awakening workshops? Because, you know, typically they've been done in person, haven't they? But maybe, I know Amala Vajra is a bit under the weather at the moment, but maybe it would be possible for someone to run something like that as well.
Yeah. No,
maybe a future seminar.
Great idea. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll put it down as an idea, but I think it's a good one, because views around money are such a big one. Yeah.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I just wanted to hand over, if that's okay, to Maitra Nara for something else. So Maitra Nara, I'm going to spotlight you, and you can unmute yourself, hopefully.
Right, thanks very much. I'm just going to get this on gallery view so I can see you all. Yeah, so first of all, thanks. Well, my name's Maitra Nara. I work for Future Dharma Fund, and well, firstly, just want to really give my appreciation to Kusala Devi and Sangamani for kind of making, well, it's so practical, but also so human, this fundraising process. And thanks very much, Vajrashura, for it's just so able in setting all this up and facilitating it. So, and also just thanks everyone for coming, really, because it's really unprecedented. We're all together in this, aren't we? We're together in wanting to get the Dharma, meditation, a sense of community out there. And also we're up against conditions. We're up against the conditions of lockdown, of COVID-19, and all the pressures of that, and the pressures that puts on our centres. So I just want to say that all the centres are in the same boat. My local centre is Brixton. Very diverse Sangha that we have in Brixton. And well, one of the more kind of, in a way, modest things that we've been doing is a midday call. So we've been doing this midday call 6 days a week, where Sangha can we call it community life, and people can just kind of tune in, and it's a short call, talk about how things are going. And in a way, it's been one of the more moving, it's been probably the most moving thing I've been involved with through the centre, because you just really beamed into people's lives, aren't you? You kind of, you're in their bedroom, in their lounge, their cats walking by, their partners walking by with a cup of tea, the child's kind of shouting for daddy or mummy. So it's kind of, you're really in their lives, and I really feel like I kind of moved through this whole lockdown with these people. It's been really quite moving, and their feedback is that they've just really so appreciated the Dharma, the meditation classes we've been doing, and the well, just this sense of community, this sense of being part of something. So I'm sure that's the same everywhere. I'm sure that's the same in all of your situations, wherever you are throughout the world. I'm sure people are really, really appreciative of what you're doing to reach out to them. And Future Dharma Fund have been trying to support this. So we've created this appeal. We launched it a few weeks ago, called Thrive Online, reaching out to a world in need. And well, what we've been doing is we've been trying to support centres in 3 ways. We've been helping them financially in initial phases of the lockdown. People really wanted to know about furloughing and mortgage repayments and all this kind of practical financial information. So we've been helping with that. And then we employed Kusala Devi, or alongside that, we employed Kusala Devi to well, really do what she's doing. She's created all these resources for fundraisers. She's created these sharing platforms. She's been doing these webinars and really working with centres like one-to-one to kind of well, go through and make sure they're effective in their fundraising. And well, finally, we've been supporting the Sikkha project, which we fund through Vajrashura, to create these webinars. And I'm sure some of you, I'm sure a lot of you have been on these webinars. It's been fantastic. You've got people like Maitri Bandhu sharing best Dharma practice, how to promote Dharma practice. You've got Ratnaguna talking about how to engage people on Zoom. And it's strange, isn't it? Because we're trying to engage with these, I see you all in these little boxes. I saw a friend the other day down at down in Brixton, and I expected him to be carrying a little box with him. Where's your box? You know, I hadn't seen him for months. So with new ways of engaging people, and we're trying to really help centres to do that in an effective way. And then globally, we've got the Buddhist Centre Online and the International Council working to really connect our community internationally. And finally, the work we're doing is well, it's the same in India. We've got a lot of our Indian brothers and sisters here, really pleased to see you all. It's the same in India, everything's moving online. But also, there's this, what's really fascinating is how the online platform's been kind of leveraged, how it's been used to effectively target and get resources, material resources to people that really need them. And we've now taken over the funding for the Indian ordination team, and along with our youth team and Indian ordination team, often these people have been coming out of the slums and difficult places where the resources are needed, so they know how to get them to the people that's been needed. So in a way, that's been the most, I've just been really inspired by the stories about that. Rickshaw drivers working together with consultants, unheard of in a caste system, that they're working together to deliver relief where it's needed, inspired by the Dharma. So it's wonderful what's happening throughout the world. And in this Thrive Online campaign, reaching out to a world in need, we've realised we worked out we need £200,000 to keep this work going, keep this support going, keep people supporting people to reach out. And we've raised £70,000 already. So we've already raised £70,000 in the first 3 weeks of the appeal. People are getting behind this and supporting us. So the ask is, between this seminar and the one that we're going to do later in the day for different time zones, there's going to be over 120 people attending. And if those that could, if those that are in a position to do so, would give £25 a month, £25 a month for 12 months, just to get us really through this, well, this phase of difficulty. And if we could get this £25 a month, we could fund Kusala Devi, we could fund in entirety the Sikkha project, and we could also fund the youth teams and centre coordinator in India. So that money is going to go a really long way, and we could just kind of do that together in one day. It's amazing. We could just kind of do that together in one day, just by following, by highlighting the link that Vajrashura has put on the chat box. If you don't know where the chat box is, it's you can find that at the bottom of the page. You click the chat, that will enlarge the box. You'll see the link there, and you can either click on that, or you can copy it for later use, or you can save the chat box. So either way, really, if you're moved by this kind of real communal effort that our community is engaged in, kind of unprecedented in a way, this communal effort to kind of keep reaching out globally, then just kind of follow your impulse and give and get yourself to that appeals page, and you can give there. And if you choose to, you can restrict money to the India Dharma Trust appeal. if you would like to, the Indian ordination team. Okay, so thanks very much for listening. Thanks for taking part, and I'll just hand you back over to the very able Vajeshura.
Great, thanks much, Nara. So really do think about, please do give, because all this stuff that we're putting on, it's all thanks to Future Dharma and them funding us. So no money, no Future Dharma, no seminars. And I think I also work in the Dublin Buddhist Centre, and these things have been so useful for us. Future Dharma have been such a good support, so do give.